Caleb, if I told you before the season that James Pearce Jr., who was projected as the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft, would go pro after his 3rd collegiate season, which was last year, you would have said what?
I would have said, duh.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
but things have changed. Things have changed significantly. Here's how things have changed, Caleb. Let's start with this. Number 1, James Pearce is not as highly regarded as an NFL prospect. Why? I believe it's partly because Tennessee misused him. He dropped into pass coverage way more than he ever should have. Should have just been an edge rusher, wreaked havoc. And I know we were told, hey, he's pressuring guys, and you and I kind of bought that a little bit for a while at the beginning of the season. But the simple fact is, it's the worst misuse of a player since Leonard Little played middle linebacker instead of, ironically, edge rusher way back in 1996.
I thought it was 97. I thought it was a senior season when they did that.
I thought they moved him back to edge rusher, but we could
because in his senior season they made him a 3rd down edge rusher. He would play middle linebacker on 1st and 2nd down, and then be edge rusher on 3rd down, and he still managed like 10 sacks. It was insane.
Okay, so which is worse, or are they very comparable?
What they did with Leonard Little is way worse still, and the reason I'll say what they did with
to me, they're one and the same.
Okay, Pearce still they never moved Pearce to a position he couldn't play. Yes, he should have been rushing the passer more, but look, Leonard Little, for 2 reasons. One, you're wasting Leonard Little's talent as an edge rusher. That's the issue with Pearce. But the other thing is, Leonard Little wasn't a good middle linebacker. No. He was too slow.
He was average at best. Now, but let me say this. At least with a Little situation, you had a vacancy at middle linebacker. They put Pearce all over the place, dropped him into pass coverage when they had a pretty good secondary and a pretty good. Well, they didn't have great linebacker pass coverage, but they did have their slot guy in Boo Carter. So, I mean, you're dropping him into pass coverage when you were pretty good in pass defense.
Are we sure that's not part of why they were good in pass defense?
I don't think so. I don't know why he wasn't rip-roaring off the edge 40, 50 times a game. That should have been his job. What you play, 60, 70 snaps? I know in 2022 they were like at the 85 clip, but typically you play, let's say around 60 snaps. He should have been doing nothing but going after the passer for the lion's share of those reps, period, in discussion.
Are we okay? I get it. I still think more often than not he was rushing the passer. Now, I think they may have dropped him back in coverage more than they should, and I'm with you on that. But again, it's not like he can't be good in coverage. And I push back that they had a vacancy at middle linebacker in 97. No, they could have put Al Wilson in middle linebacker in 97. Again, they thought he was too small because back in those days, they thought your middle linebacker should be like a goalie in hockey, which is just ridiculous to think about. It was outdated then, funny enough. But Pearce, I'm with you overall. They misused him. I think they're thinking of Pearce, though, was that he's so dynamic. I think what we're missing, Dave, is that they had other edge rushers that they could use, that they can mix in, which is why they could drop Pearce back in coverage, because Joshua Josephs could be an effective edge rusher. Not to the level of James Pearce, but he could be. Also, when Jordan Ross is in the game, look, I told you guys this. I think Jordan Ross is going to end up being a better edge rusher than James Pearce was when it's all said and done. So by mixing those guys in, I think that allowed them.
I'm not trying to Dalton connect you here, but Pearce is at least going to go in the middle of the first round. So I will play the odds and say that you're incorrect. Even though my eyeball test wants to agree with you, actually.
This is kind of like, I think Rodney Garner is producing edge rushers the way Lincoln Riley produced quarterbacks a few years ago. I think that's what's happening. Matter of fact, we should do a topic on that. Is Rodney Garner the Lincoln Riley of edge rushers at this point? Because there was like a 3-year run where you had Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and was it Jalen Hurts, and they all went like number 1 or something like that.
Yep.
And Rodney Garner's turning into that with edge rushers between Byron Young, now James Pearce, and then Jordan Ross next, and Joshua Josephs is probably going to get drafted too. I think they dropped James Pearce back in coverage a little more because of the talent they had around him at edge rusher, and they felt that he could be I think there were a lot of timed routes against Tennessee, and they wanted to take those away over the middle. And so I think that was a big focus of them, because let's not forget, let's go back to the Chavis days, Dave, because you just talked about third and Chavis yesterday with Jimmy. And you talked about like how like Notre Dame screened him to death down the field one time. Do you remember one year, I think it was in South Carolina and Spurrier beat them, they quick slanted Chavis the whole way down the field?
Yes.
And if you just drop an end in coverage drop him in coverage one time and it's over, right?
Yes.
Just drop an end back in coverage one time and that quick slant is not happening anymore. And, you know, I felt like now I'm with you. I do think they overdid it, because I think they already did it one time with James Pearce. They did it last year in the Citrus Bowl against Iowa, and he got a pick 6. But I also think that, I mean, are we not short selling Pearce's production, given how many
7.5 sacks? If I would have told you 7.5 sacks before the year, you would have said that's terrible. Our poll question,
I would have said that teams sold out to make sure he couldn't stop them, and I would have assumed that other players got sacks and racked up stats too. I mean, I've never been one that. Let's not forget this. This is why defensive ends should never do Heisman campaigns like Jadeveon Clowney did in 2013. It's so easy to run away from them, and they affect coverage in so many other ways. I mean, don't you think? Tell me if I'm wrong. Is judging a defensive end by sacks, isn't that kind of like judging a cornerback by interceptions?
No.
It's not? You don't think it is?
No, because I can choose not to throw your way, and I can roll out the other direction. I can do a lot. But, yeah, I mean, maybe for a game, I can eliminate a guy. Tennessee did that in 2022 with Will Anderson, who I thought was a generational talent. Now, that's debatable. But the poll question is this. Tennessee's usage of James Pearce was ridiculous. Fine. The D was great. Right about 50-50. And it's brought to you by our fantastic friends of the studio sponsors of the program, Ted Russell Ford Lincoln on Kingston Pike and Parkside Drive. If you want incredible, absolutely incredible selection, and you want fantastic service, basically I left them about what I wanted, and we're going to wait until somebody trades one in. They have the biggest selection of new and used cars, and when it comes to integrity and being great people, know that you'll be taken care of. Absolutely love Ted Russell Ford Lincoln. I'll tell you more about them here in a moment. But no, Caleb, I just thought Pearce would have a bigger impact before the season. I thought he would have 12 sacks. That's kind of where I had the number. I thought there would be a couple of games in which, let's say like Chattanooga or Kent State, and I know they didn't play him the entire game there, that he would pad a little bit with 2 sacks, but ultimately be a real pass rushing factor in every game. And I don't think you can make that statement. Can you, Caleb?
Well,
was he a huge factor in every game? Listen, if you're a first round pick, you should be a huge factor in every game.
You see, maybe you and I see defensive ends differently. I just feel like I feel like to a lesser degree, defensive ends can be an impact just as decoys, because they draw so much attention from blockers. And I feel like James Pearce did that. So it's hard for me to say that. It's hard for me to say that in games he didn't rack up stats, he wasn't a factor. He was drawing double teams so many times, and I think teams were running away from him a lot, honestly. So I don't know. I think it's very easy to neutralize a defensive end statistically. You do it at your own cost, because you got to free up other people to wreak havoc on you. But I think a lot of teams, am I missing this, Dave? But I feel like a lot of teams sold out to take James Pearce out of the game, which they willingly freed up, which you can do.
Okay, let me ask you this. Who played on the other side? And I hate to put you on the spot. I hate it when people do quiz broadcasting, but who lined up on the other side of Sean Ellis? Do you recall?
Corey Terry?
I think that's right. Corey Terry was a good player. He wasn't a great player. I think he had a short stay in the NFL. Why? Because Sean Ellis was dominating on one side of the ball. So let me ask you this. If your theory is true, and you're saying that teams sold out to stop Pearce, then who benefited from that? Who on the other side got a handful of sacks because the protection was slanted towards Pearce? Who did that? I don't know of anyone. Do you?
I I would venture to say, well, no, because most of the other guys who got sacks were interior defensive linemen. So you're all right. I mean, Omar Norman Lott, Dominic Bailey, and Jackson Moy were the other three. I would say maybe Joshua Josephs. I mean, Josephs did have 9 tackles for a loss on the year. So, but I mean, I'll give you that. Like, no one really stood out. Like, because you're right, Corey Terry stood out. I mean, we're about to talk about John Henderson. I mean, he was a defensive tackle, and because of him, Will Overstreet turned into an NFL draft pick, honestly.
Yep.
And so I do get your point. And you're right. Nobody really stood out to become a star. But I mean, we also have to remember Tennessee rotated so much this year. And they did, I think, lead the SEC in tackles for loss. Yep. So, I mean, I think that it was kind of a by committee of people that stood out on the other side. It wasn't like the 98 team where it was just Corey Terry. And also, I mean, I still kind of debate with Corey Terry standing out because Shaun Ellis was a star in 98. But I think part of that was because Shaun Ellis didn't command the attention that James Pearce would have this year, because you got to remember, Dave, that was his first year as the feature defensive end. I mean, he wasn't the star in 2097.
I got to be honest with you. I thought that teams did slant to stop him and put extra protection his way. And that's part of the reason that I was a bit surprised about how good he was in the NFL.